All right, does this microphone work? Yes. I'd like to thank Professor Mark Hamilton for his very thought-provoking and interactive presentation that got us all thinking and actually moving. You raised a number of very interesting and kind of key issues, Mark, which I won't try to summarize, but I think, the important questions of why young people matter, what are the drivers of conflict? I think that's a very important question. And, how do our understanding of the drivers of conflict help form this theory of change, which will then lead to the kind of program interventions that we might make? And also, just what are the challenges of youth participation, when, and, why and when? So I think you've raised some really important issues that set the kind of broad framework for our discussions, and Mark's going to speak to everybody again just before we go to coffee break and before we break into the group work to further kind of elaborate some of those ideas and how you can discuss them throughout the morning. So our objective and our opportunity this morning is to draw on the kind of diverse perspectives and experiences in this room and to consider how youth voices can be empowered in and through education to become agents of change in conflict transformation and peace building. And I'm delighted that I'm able to introduce a very diverse and excellent number of speakers up on the podium here with me today. And I'm going to introduce them all now and then invite them to take their turn to speak. And then afterwards we'll have time for maybe 2-3 questions depending on how we're going from the floor. So I'll start by introducing Aram Barra, who is the projects director at Espolea, a Mexican NGO working with youth across Latin America. Lyndsay, who's a program specialist at UNESCO IIEP and works on education planning. Saji Prelis, who's the director for children and youth programs at Search for Common Ground. Brenda Haiplik, who's senior education advisor working in the area of education and emergencies at UNICEF headquarters in New York. And His Excellency Mr. Jean-Jacques Nyenimigabo, Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture from Burundi. So welcome you all here, and I'm going to pass over to Aram to start our discussions. Thank you, Aram.
Thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to first and foremost congratulate the UNESCO, its chairs, and all the partners and friends that have made this event possible. I truly, truly recognize the commitment this agency has towards young people and our participation in the decisions that affect our own lives. I want to, however, remind you and perhaps warn you that I am an activist and I am a youth advocate, and thus I will be rather critical on my approach to what has been said and done here and what will be produced throughout this meeting. On that note, I really appreciate having a morning session, even if I only get 4 or 5 minutes to speak. I really think pushing young people to the end of the day with a half-full room, as was done yesterday evening, could very well be misinterpreted. If we really are to talk about youth participation, we need to take it into the last detail, regardless of the political implications these may have. Now, all of this I say coming from Mexico, a country that, as you may know, has given a new meaning to the otherwise rhetorical war on drugs. When the current outgoing president, Mr. Felipe Calderón, took office 6 years ago, he took the armies into the streets under the premise that he needed to, and I quote, keep drugs away from our children. 6 years, as I just said, have passed, and the results are nothing but tragic. Over 60,000 people have lost their lives. Youth homicides have tripled and reached up to 45 per 100 inhabitants in states like Chihuahua and Baja California in the north of the country. Meanwhile, over 15,000 children were murdered between 2007 and 2010. You may indeed ask, what does this have to do with this forum? Well, this is a context, I think, in which the mean minimum salary, in which the mean minimum salary for 1 year of work only reaches $1,300. That is under $5 per day worked. But organized crime will offer me between $200 and $400 at an entry level for staying quiet and fulfilling criminal orders. This is also a country where young people aged 12 through 29 who neither study nor work have reached 7 million people. This is over 20% of young people who are between these ages. As a Mexican young person, Mexico today represents to me everything a government should avoid doing when it comes to policy making and programming. Yet, it brings up several topics worth questioning about. As was said yesterday, long are the days when we young people were seen to be in a transitional phase to adulthood. Well, not so long ago, we should really overcome the fact that we are not a problematic challenge to solve in terms of development. And hopefully Egypt and the rest of the Arab Springs have taught us something and tell us that long are the days when we are the hope and the faith of the future. We young people, I think, are today active in thought, in design, in implementation, in monitoring and evaluation of research, of policy, of program and service delivery. We are today a main driver of economy, of society, and, as my country proves, of violence and conflict as well. The natural question arrives: what is the impact of lack of formal and informal education on the rates of employment, on the rates of urban violence, and even in the rates or prevalence of diseases such as HIV? I think from a research standpoint, we must understand conflict settings as an ongoing natural process that needs skills to be transformed, and not only as frontal fire wars. Second, we ought to look at the diversity of types of youth participation and the lack of age disaggregated data that we have in every topic of the development agenda. And third, we must foster more studies on the sociological and psychological impacts of violence and conflict in children and how to better respond to it. And from a policy and program perspective, one, I cannot repeat it enough: involvement, involvement, involvement. And second, let's look into new ways of integrating most at-risk populations into the central society. And this is open up to the new and stop criminalizing young people for being young, for being gay, for being women, for being drug users, for being migrants. Stop criminalizing for being sex workers, for being black, for being indigenous, for being disabled, or simply because we are underage. I'll end up by saying, remember, young people are part of our communities. We are part of your community. It sounds very simplistic and, I would even say stupid, but we really need to remind ourselves this is a reality. If we are able to understand that our demands, our needs, and our wills are something that is common, we will be, I think, I would even assure, we will be on the right path to transformation of conflict and build peaceful societies. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. How can I follow that? It's really unfair. It's a great pleasure to be here as one of the organising committees, to be up here and speaking to you all. So I'm very happy I was given this opportunity. To answer the question that Kate has posed, yes, education can support processes of conflict transformation and peace building in many ways, and we've already heard from Mark and from Forrest Whitaker and from Aram about some of the ways that this can happen. But we can't do it unless we plan for it. Planning is not just about a product. It's not just about the piece of paper, the book, the sector plan that you put on the shelf. We've all seen many ministries around the world where there's a beautiful, shiny sector plan that is stuck on a shelf. We're not talking about planning in that sense. We're talking about planning as a process. Planning that means we understand where we're coming from and where we want to go to. Basically the theory of change that Mark has talked about already. Unless we plan for this, unless we understand this process and how we can change, we can't transform education systems to be the peaceful processes that, and encourage the peaceful processes that we want them to undertake. And we have to plan for this regardless of whether it's to promote education for conflict prevention or peace building, whether it's to plan for education for civic engagement or for skills development. Unless we address these issues in policy development and planning processes, we can't start or maintain or monitor the change. How can we make sure that we really have lived up to the expectations that Aram has put in front of us about the participation and the involvement of youth, unless we can demonstrate that we've made that step change over a period of time. And it does take time. Planning and development education is not an instant process. And it can be done. IIEP, for example, has taken on some groundbreaking work, I think, actually, in crisis-sensitive planning. For example, we're helping governments like South Sudan, Burkina Faso, Chad, in other countries, to ensure that conflict and disaster risk reduction are included as measures in education sector planning processes. And this approach to planning applies also to the engagement of youth. It's not just about, the issues of youth and engaging and involving youth also have to be part of a process for planning and embedding into policy and decision making. And we have to make a commitment to do so. And this is to make sure that the education system that young people are part of is relevant to their needs. South Sudan, for example, is one of the very few countries that actually consulted. I wouldn't say fully engaged, but at least consulted, it's a start, consulted youth and had the voices of youth in their education sector plan. That's very unusual. Very few education sector plans have voices of youth as part of the plan that's presented. So unless youth and policymakers agree to work together to plan change, then yes, the youth engagement will always be tokenistic. The dialogue that's taking place, the rich dialogue that will take place between generations here, between youth and ministers, in this atmosphere of trust and respect, is essential in breaking down the barriers to genuine youth engagement, and that's why I think this is such a unique occasion. And I really hope that the group work sessions that you're going to be participating in will allow the voices of youth and decision-making, the two wisdoms, as Forrest Whitaker put it. I thought that was a lovely term, the two wisdoms to come together for a common agenda for action in the final day tomorrow. We have a unique opportunity here. It is very, very rare that we have such an opportunity to engage in such a way, and I think we owe it to ourselves, to the young people and to our countries to make a difference and to agree that education can be transformative and can build the peace that we all so desire. Thank you.
Good morning. It is truly wonderful to be part of this thoughtful conversation about the nexus of education, youth, and peace building. And I want to thank you for inviting me to join you in this conversation. I'll attempt to talk about limit my conversation to about 3 points, and try to complement Professor Hamilton's earlier remarks as well. So I'll talk about 3. One is about challenges of collaboration and coordination. The other is the challenges and opportunities around societal transformation. And close with talking a little bit about accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Saji Prelis. I represent an organization called Search for Common Ground. It's an international non-governmental organization working in about 30 countries, and our focus is around conflict transformation and peace building. The mission of our organization is to transform the way the world deals with conflict, away from adversarial approaches to collaborative solutions. Therefore, the core of our work in about 30 countries is focused around education and learning. We see this work around education as deeply rooted in societal and in social and political work, but it's always nonpartisan. We see the role of education as shaping responsible citizenship. Therefore, this is about relationships, understanding ourselves to our community, understanding ourselves to each other, understanding ourselves to the state. But it also involves understanding ourselves with our friends and those we don't often like to get along with. So therefore, one of the biggest challenges we grapple with is how to transform a society away from adversarial approaches to addressing difficulties to trying to find collaborative ways to do that among society members. While one of our longest running programs for the last 14 years has been focused around formal education in Macedonia, but majority of our focus is on informal education. It's about transforming societal attitudes away from adversarial approaches towards collaborative solutions. To have a society-wide impact, because that's our challenge, we use radio and television to engage all actors in a society, where young people are the ones driving the design and the content of the message, and it's repeated in radio and television programs that is done in an entertaining way that reaches millions of people. The purpose there is to alter the relationship between young people and adults in their communities, where adults get to see young people as leaders, possible young people who have solutions that they can contribute to society in a positive way than often as the troublemakers. But the way we do it is about creating that enabling environment with young people so they can find concrete alternatives to violence in their own communities. Besides using media for societal transformation, we also use a variety of other, work with a lot of local organizations, youth structures, on building consultative networks with young people so they actually work across the dividing lines in their own communities. An example I can share quickly is in Nepal, where young people across the country travel to all the remote villages, talk to different political parties to try to find a consensus document and develop a consensus document to be part of the constitution-making process in Nepal. Yet, one of the challenges we see when we work with young people is recognizing, and when they get recognized as leaders in a society, when they recognize their voice in a society, the fear is that they may not keep the door open behind them for the other young people who are following. Always, we also take a long-term approach to our programs. But a challenge we have and we see is that young people and other stakeholders may not have the same long-term vision. As an organization that's not focused on only creating jobs, the challenge we then also have is finding ways to create not jobs, but giving skills to address the complex divisions that already exist in our countries. As a collaborative leader, what Mark Hamilton and also Professor Allen talked about is working within the peacebuilding sector, the humanitarian sector, the development sector, and the security sector to kind of work together as a priority to create an enabling environment for young people. And that's not often easy because, to be honest with you, we are also very competitive. And that's very challenging for young people to see us as adults and international actors competing to get the attention of the donors. So I envision, in closing, a future, a world where young people are able to hold each other accountable among themselves, but also able to hold us as international actors more accountable, and not just us to be accountable to our donors. Thank you.
Bonjour, good morning, salam alaikum. Young people are a majority of the population in many conflict-affected countries. Goals for education and sustainable peace cannot be achieved without young people. All stakeholders in the UNICEF Peacebuilding, Education and Advocacy in Conflict-Affected Contexts program have committed to reach, engage, and empower young people as peace builders through education. This new and innovative program targets 13 countries: Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Somalia, Ethiopia, Burundi, Uganda, South Sudan, Yemen, Occupied Palestinian Territory, and Pakistan. The first step in the program is to conduct a conflict analysis of the education sector in each country to better understand the role that education plays. Programming is then directly linked to evidence provided by this analysis. We hope that results from this program will help to both, ideally, leverage interest in and additional funds for countries well beyond this program. From UNICEF's rights-based approach, we understand the following: that youth are assets for their communities and societies to build a sustainable peace. That youth can bring fresh energy for change, new perspectives on old problems, and innovative solutions. That youth have a right to speak and be heard about issues that affect them. This is especially relevant in post-conflict and peace-building contexts. From UNICEF's global experience, we know that young people are often seen as liabilities or even the cause of conflict. That young people are rarely and systematically and meaningfully engaged in peace-building plans and other programs. From the countries currently engaged in this program of education and peace-building, we have learned the following: that young people's frustrations have been found to be conflict drivers. Their frustrations are expressed as political exclusion, educational exclusion, economic exclusion, and feelings of alienation and powerlessness. Youth frustration can lead to the following: involvement in armed groups, intergenerational conflicts, conflicts related to sexual harassment and to political manipulation, and conflicts experienced due to poor quality education. Education can be both transformative and a driver of conflict. Therefore, an overarching goal that we must further discuss in the coming days is how to empower young people as agents of positive change through education. What are the challenges? Well, we know that an effective programming response must find, count, reach, and engage all young people, especially those who are the most marginalized. Girls and young women are more likely to disappear or be invisible. They are married, trafficked, and become victims of violence as a result of conflict. Education programs must reach girls and young women proactively. Boys, too, face unique vulnerabilities, such as engagement in violent groups. Education programs must offer them real and compelling alternatives. Children and young people with disabilities also disappear and can further be marginalized by conflict. Programming must reach them and must not further marginalize or stigmatize them. There are other marginalized groups of young people who must be seen for their unique needs and understood and addressed through equitable education and engagement. In emergencies, both natural disaster and those that are man-made, the most vulnerable are the most at risk. An effective programming response must also reflect and address the priorities and concerns of young people to ensure their relevance and value. Some examples of priorities that young people have told us about include: young people call for education that supports economic empowerment and livelihoods opportunities. Transitions to adulthood are also a concern because conflict disrupts traditional pathways and leads to marginalization. Education programs should not contribute to inequities, but instead should support an equity agenda and positive social transformation. I want to tell you briefly about an experience I had a few weekends ago in New York. I met two quite well-known ex-child soldiers, Ishmael Baal from Sierra Leone and Grace Akolo from Uganda. Both talked about their experiences with education, both positive and negative. But both said that education brought them away from violence and back to peace. They both said education is life. The challenges ahead are enormous, and there is no blueprint for success. You, the young people in this audience, represent the youth of this planet. You must engage and you must wage peace through positive, transformative education. Shukran, thank you, merci beaucoup.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I first of all thank UNESCO for organizing this forum on education policy, the role of education in transforming conflicts, civic engagement, and taking young people towards working life. Burundi was honored to be invited, and our Minister in charge of youth is our panelist. We're honored because of that. We have Mr. Roland Ruggiero, a Burundi journalist, and indeed, this is a sign of the confidence in the future of our country, and we want to make youth, of course, a player in achieving peace and peaceful transformation. Since 2005, which was the end of the cruel war opposing our different populations, our country has embarked upon a process of peace consolidation and development after having determined a new Vision 2025 to promote quality education by setting up a policy aiming at the development of a well-educated Burundian population. Burundi is a country where illiteracy is among the highest, more than 57% after the war. And that situation, in fact, was not a cause, but a driver of conflict anyway, in fact, which affected our country. So, when many of our youth were not able to go to a school, then indeed they were open to destabilization, and therefore they destabilized the country, and they weren't able to conduct a critical analysis of the situation. So our president, in fact, took measures such as free schooling for children up to the age of 12, and free health care as well for all children aged under 5 years, and for mothers, even those who give birth by cesarean. Now, this was accompanied by the construction of schools, health centers, and with the backing of the population itself, without any outside help. Every Saturday morning, people were involved, and with the participation of the government and the President of the Republic. As to the ministry in charge of youth, well, we, with our partners, particularly from the United Nations system, UNESCO, UNDP, UNICEF, UNEPA, we therefore started to make our youth responsible and do away with the forces that had destroyed our country, and so we're involved in national reconstruction. We created a national youth forum with all group or youth leaders from several ethnic groups and religions from the different provinces in Burundi. Through a participatory approach, these young people openly expressed themselves and came up with recommendations which would inspire our action in favor of the young. These included the establishment of a national youth policy, determining the role of the government and youth. Secondly, the establishment of a national youth council of elected representatives, representatives elected by the youth themselves. And then we created also youth centers in all towns throughout all districts throughout the country, providing training and awareness programs on a number of aspects such as citizenship and the peaceful resolution of conflicts, sexual reproduction, and the fight against HIV/AIDS. We also set up a training course for young people who had no professional experience. Also, we set up a fund for the promotion of young people and young business-minded people so that we could provide loans, therefore, through the banking system, through microfinancing. Also, we had national volunteers system with input from the United Nations, and all this, therefore, is being done because these recommendations are in keeping with our Youth Empowerment Program for Sustainable Development. And this was backed by the recent meeting in Equatorial Guinea of African heads of state. Now, we've also worked to reintegrate young people who have been demobilized. And therefore, with the support of partners and ambassadors accredited in Burundi, each year we've organized sports events, interministerial, intercommunal sports events involving traditional games and so on and so forth, as well as cultural events. Also, the associations, youth associations, have played an important role in cooperation with the ministry, with IFES as well, an American organization. We have indeed studied the behavior of young people and indeed supervise young people before and during elections. As I said, we've set up universities, schools and youth centres throughout the country. We have responsible participation of our young people. They've decided to bury the hatchet. And on behalf of my government and on my behalf, I'd like to thank all those who have supported my country and helped us through this period, and helped us in seeking funds from donors so that we can fight poverty. And we work on youth health and employment, and they are factors for sustainable development. We thank UNESCO for having maintained the Bujumbura Bureau. We think that is very important in building peace in our country. We have shown our region that peace and education are indeed priceless. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all the speakers, particularly the Minister, for his patience in overcoming the technical difficulties that we faced. There's always some challenges. I'm sure there might be more throughout the day. We haven't got much time now, I'm afraid, for our discussions. And I'm really not going to take very much time, just to, I think the panelists reinforced the kind of key messages, you know, starting from the fact that youth are they are part of our community. They're not this something aside, as maybe we're even describing them, you know. They're an asset, as Brenda said, and they have a right to speak and a right to be heard, and we need to be accountable to them, as you said. And then we've heard kind of concretely from the Minister some of the practical and concrete steps that have happened in Burundi that I think are, you know, a good and important example. And just to finish on what Lyndsay said before opening up to the floor about the importance of planning with youth, you know, and that's the name of this thing, Plan with Youth, and that's what we're trying to do here. So I'll now open the floor. I'll take, I think we'll just have time maybe for 2 questions, and I'm going to ask all the panelists to try and respond. So if you could ask questions that are quite general rather than very specific, that would be helpful. And as I think someone said yesterday, if you could ask a question rather than give a long speech yourself. Thank you very much. One here and one at the back there, please. So take the one here and then the one at the back.
Merci. Je m'appelle Nathalie Soro.
Thank you. I'm Nathalie Soro and I come from Côte d'Ivoire.
Ma question va s'adresser à Monsieur Marc
Mr.
Hilton tout à l'heure,
Mark
qui
Hilton,
nous a parlé
who
des théories
talked
du
about
changement.
theories of
Alors,
change.
en tant que jeune, mon pays sort de
As young
crise,
people, my
c'est-à-dire la
country
Côte
is
d'Ivoire,
getting
parce que
out
nous
of
avons
a
remarqué
crisis. I'm talking about Côte d'Ivoire.
beaucoup de jeunes qui étaient
And
engagés
many young
dans le
people
conflit, que ce soit
involved in the
en
conflict,
tenant des armes ou bien
because they
tenant la
were
mobilisation politique,
using
c'était des personnes
weapons
plus ou moins
or
éduquées,
involved
des personnes
in
qui avaient
political
en tout cas des
fights,
diplômes
were
universitaires pour la
people with
plupart,
degrees, university
mais qui
degrees,
se sont retrouvés sans emploi et
but
qui n'avaient
they
pas
ended up
d'horizon, qui
without
n'avaient pas de
a job.
perspective.
They had
La question que je voulais
no
poser pour le
opportunities.
changement,
The
quand
question that I
ils
wanted
agissaient
to
pour eux,
ask,
c'était
when they
pour le
were
changement, ils
taking
voulaient le
action for
changement.
themselves,
Mais
they
on s'est rendu
want
compte
change, but we
qu'il y a des
realized that
adultes
there are
qui ont peur
adults
de céder la
that
place.
do
Parce
not
que vous
want
avez vos
to
diplômes, vous avez terminé,
make room for
vous voulez
them.
vous intégrer
You
dans
have
la
a
société,
degree, you completed
mais
your
les adultes
education, you
considèrent
want
que
to
vous,
be
quand vous avez un
included
emploi,
into
c'est eux qui sortent de
society,
l'autre côté.
but adults think that they
L'éducation a
are
réussi à nous donner un niveau de
excluded
comprendre
if they
les
leave room for the
réalités
young
et les
people.
enjeux. Mais ensuite,
Education helps
la
us
place que
understand
nous
what's
devons
at stake,
occuper pour être
but
utile
then
à la
the
société,
place
nous
that we
n'avons pas
have
cette
to
place.
have
Comment est-ce que la théorie
within
du
society,
changement
well, we don't
qui vient
have it.
d'être exposée
How
ici
do we explain that
résout cette
within
problématique?
this
Parce que
theory of
sinon, on
change
risque de
that you
retourner encore
explained?
dans cette réalité au niveau de
Because
la
we
Côte
could
d'Ivoire.
go
Et
back to
l'autre,
that reality in
c'est une
Côte d'Ivoire.
contribution. C'est que
And
j'ai
the other
eu
thing
à faire
is
un
a
plaidoyer pour la
contribution.
jeunesse
I
à
had
Monaco
to advocate
l'année
for
dernière
young
après
people in Monaco last year after the 7th Youth Forum at the Peace and Sports Forum. How do donors can help, because do you think that at UNESCO something can be considered? Another question here.
Bonjour. I'm Paul Smith from Public Achievement in Northern Ireland. I've quite a simple question. I'm interested in whether the panel think young people are taken more seriously during conflict or in the post-conflict environment. My perspective from Northern Ireland is that young people have been largely sidelined in the post-conflict environment, whereas they were fundamental to prosecuting the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'll take one more question now from the lady here, and then...
Bonjour tout le monde, Driss Aïda, je suis enseignant-chercheur.
Thank you very much. I'm a researcher, and I would like to ask a question on the content of peace. What meaning do you give to peace? Because it does remain a vague concept. Are you talking about economic peace, social peace, political peace? So we have to understand this to be able to understand what it means in education. What values are we trying to promote when we talk about peace? So when you talk about theory of change, etc., I think we need to take these, this content on board. So we have to define this concept first. Thank you.
I'm going to offer to the panel. Aram, you've got a mic there. You've got a mic.
Is this on? Yeah. I'll address a little bit the one on Ireland. I think I want to address it directly because I want to actually talk about young people. But I think something that we don't often talk about and that we should talk more about is the impacts that conflict and war in particular have in children, and that next generation of young people, if you will. I don't think we're very much prepared. I'm not an expert on that particular topic, but there are some studies, and I don't think many of the countries that we see having conflict right now are prepared or attempting to put that forward in terms of programming and in terms of policy to respond to that reality that will come, eventually.
I think I'm going to hand to Mark to talk about the theories of change, because I think that's his area of expertise, and how young people might be part of a process of taking forward a process of theory of change, and how young people fit into that process. I'd probably like to sort of speak a bit more to, how you define peace. I mean, I think what we've heard from the other panelists and from the young people yesterday and people who are working in this area is that it depends on the context. Like in the same way that Mark was saying that youth and Forrest Whitaker was saying that youth are not a homogenous group, neither is peace a homogenous concept. It's a diverse concept that changes according to whatever context you are in. And I think this is why the conflict analysis process that Brenda was talking about for the Peacebuilding and education program is exceptionally important, because you cannot define what peace means to you in your society until you have defined what are the drivers of the conflict in the first instance.
I tried to talk a little bit about young people taken seriously during the conflict or in the post-conflict or after-conflict phases. A brief story of when we spoke to an elder from Sierra Leone during the conflict who was sharing with us. During the war, it was a young person pointed a gun at him and asked him to eat dirt from the floor. It was one of the only times a young person has so much power over an elder in the community. After the conflict was over, those roles reversed. And we see this even in the Middle East, North Africa region, where young people were pushing forward a change, and now they're pushed to the sidelines, which, in the way I see that, is that it enables the troublemakers to recruit other young people saying, I told you so. Those adults, those policymakers don't take us so seriously. So I want to throw the question back at you. I wonder if we can learn from the women's movement, looking at the Security Council Resolution 1325, 1889, and the progress that has been made in the women's movement because of such a framework. Can we learn from that? Is the Security Council Resolution framework helpful for youth? What will that do to enable young people to be much more organized and hold people more accountable?
In many countries, you can't say the word peace and you can't say the word conflict. So that's one big barrier to our work. How do young people express themselves? Very difficult. I want to give another example from Sierra Leone. When we conducted the conflict analysis, we were in a place called Pujuhun, the southern part of the country that was badly affected by the long conflict there. And I was sitting in a group with a village chief who was male, a couple of unemployed young people, and a young woman about 20 years old. She had dropped out of school in grade 9. And it was a small group, and everyone was expressing their opinions, except this young woman. And I was sitting beside her, and I kept nudging her, saying, come on, you're with other people from your village. Say something. Say what you think. She said, I can't. These are all men. I'm a 20-year-old woman. And that was very important, because we learned from that experience that when you're conducting these analysis sessions, you have to make sure that young people, that young women, young men, boys and girls of all different groups have an opportunity to express their voices. If voices can't be heard and there isn't space for those voices to be heard, you're not going to get the information you need. Young people need to be able to speak in a comfortable environment. One other point, we can talk about education and learning, but what I've seen from working in many different conflict-affected and post-conflict environments is that you can build a school, you can build youth centers, but unless you provide the psychosocial support and healing space for young people, for teachers, for parents, for grandparents, for community members, peace will not come and conflict will not end. You need to provide that support first before peace can happen.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about the first question concerning Côte d'Ivoire, the question by Madame Nathalie. About change. Well, we have noticed that in this phase of change, young people are not really considered as being full-fledged players in development. In Burundi, we decided that we should include young people we told the young people that they were the future of Burundi. And in fact, we've stopped talking about the future. We're telling them that they are today's youth of the present, so that they can feel as involved as possible. So this means that the older people have to make room for the younger people. In other words, if we reach a retirement age, then we can sort of allow them to step into our shoes. So I think this is important. The young have to understand and feel that they are full-fledged players in development, that they also can come up with innovative ideas and contribute to the development of our country. If we don't do this, then we are depriving ourselves of our development and of our future. I think this is important. It's important that young people should feel that they have a role to play, and right now. That is the only way of making them feel involved. And I think we need to also help them in this endeavor. We have to make sure that these young people actually have projects that keep them gainfully employed. It's important to provide them with this possibility. We need our partners to help young people to be responsible for themselves, to empower these young people so that they can be drivers of change and development. Now, as to the definition of peace itself, well, it's not just peace meaning that there is no war. Peace begins in our own minds, in our own souls, and obviously an empty stomach doesn't help in this case. So young people need to be employed. If they're not employed, if they don't have any future, if they don't see what lies ahead of them, obviously these young people will unfortunately drift and wander along the wrong path, because these young people will not be considered as having a future. So I think peace is indeed political, social and economic peace. All three are important for harmonious development of the young people.
This is really works. There's going to be plenty more opportunities. I think what the contributions from Mark, from the panelists, and also your questions reveal is this is a complex issue. There's not an easy, ready-made solution for how we get towards conflict transformation and peace building. But obviously the key thing for us today, tomorrow and going forward is the role of youth in this, and that's where we're going to go. I'd just like to finally thank again all the panelists. I hope you join me in thanking them once more for their excellent contributions in a very limited time, and I'm going to hand back to Mark, who's going to explain a little bit about the group work.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel. We're going to be talking next about kind of the logistics to move to our group discussions. But in the meantime, I wanted to respond briefly to the two of the questions raised that were very specific to kind of the discussion that I'd had, and then I'll talk in more detail with the individuals as well. But as regards educated young people being involved in conflict and how do we respond, I think that it's very important for us to understand the local context and to understand what drives and to bring young people into the process early on. I think one of the major problems that we have in our states and in our political processes is we make promises that we don't complete, and so we feel abandoned. And I just as a broad level, that's the first thing I'd say. As regards what do we mean by peace? Peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is not the absence of violence. Peace has social, political, economic, and cultural aspects. And when we look at particular contexts, we need to be very specific about what we mean, and we should take a holistic response. I cast that broadly so that we can, in specific contexts, go more specific.